Expectations are a tricky business. Oftentimes, they can make the difference between loving and hating a show. For example, if you go into an average series expecting greatness, you'll be disappointed. If you go into it expecting shit, you'll be pleasantly surprised. In both cases, the show is the same, completely average. However, we've got one person who hated it and one who loved it. Why? Their expectations going in. Whether it's because a person you trust recommended it to you, or you saw it get great reviews, it's hard to go into something with zero preconceived notions about what you're gonna get. Maybe you go into an action series expecting a lot of fights but get mostly exposition. Maybe you go into a mystery expecting a psychological thriller but are bombarded with moe fan service. Or maybe you go into a rom-com expecting nothing but cliches and harem tropes, but are surprised with real, relatable drama. Enter Sakurasou no Pet no Kanojo, or the Pet Girl of Sakurasou. It's kind of funny, actually. I've seen people say they went into Sakurasou expecting your standard generic rom-com and come out pleasantly surprised by the drama and occasional feels. I've also seen people say they went into it expecting the same exact thing and were disappointed when they didn't get that. You see why I hate expectations. Today, under the scope, I take a look at Sakurasou no Pet no Kanojo, a rom-com that shows you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Sakurasou is best described as a fairly standard rom-com with plenty of interesting twists and relatable drama to keep it fresh. It uses a lot of the cliches you find in most rom-coms, from the oblivious chick magnet male protagonist to your lack of any real romantic development until the final episodes. Of course, Sakurasou also has some features that make it different, namely its relatable, very realistic story about struggling to achieve your dreams and handling failure. Sorata Kanda is a second-year wannabe video game designer who's forced to move into Sakurasou, the dorm for weirdos and problem children. After a rather airheaded and world-renowned artist named Mashiro moves in, Sorata gets stuck with taking care of her. Sakurasou does not sugarcoat things with its themes of success and failure. Its message essentially boils down to this: no matter how hard you try, no matter how much effort you put into something, sometimes it just doesn't work out. Generally, no matter how good you are at something, there's usually someone better. Is that depressing as fuck? Yeah, kinda, but that's also life. Sorata works so hard to achieve just a meager amount of success and still fails, while Mashiro doesn't even have to lift a finger to be showered with awards and praise. For that reason, Mashiro may piss you off at times, but guess what? That's how it works in real life, and if you've never experienced it, I'm sure you will. Unless, of course, you are a Mashiro, then you might not. But for the rest of us plebes, it's a constant struggle. As someone who has personally experienced some of the things both Sorata and Nanami go through, that's just the way it is. Sakurasou's themes of failure are incredibly true to life, so if you're looking for idealistic and fake notions of success, go for it. Just don't look here. Okay, while I step off my soapbox, let's get to the rest of the story. The comedy is handled exceptionally well overall. It's downright hilarious at times, mainly whenever Mashiro is being a fucking moron, but it's also a little over the top at others. Usually whenever they resort to fan service. Funny or not, the placement of the comedy was done well, as it rarely interrupts the more emotional scenes. And damn, this series can get emotional at times. Not just with the romance either. I was thoroughly surprised with how well the show executed its more intense moments, as they never felt forced or melodramatic. Sakurasou is at its best in its most dramatic moments, and ultimately gives you a satisfying ending, two things that really make it stand out from the pack. The story has its problems for sure. It gets off to a bit of a slow start, and the lack of progression can get very frustrating at times. It definitely relies on cliches, especially in some of the character tropes. Still, its decent comedy, wonderfully executed drama, and hyper-realistic themes separate Sakurasou's story from the huge cluster of mediocre rom-coms I see all the time, and make it something truly memorable. The more astute of you may have noticed I've left out one half of the rom-com equation. I came to Sakurasou for one reason and one reason only: the romance. As a bona fide connoisseur of romance anime myself, I can say Sakurasou handles it pretty well. It still suffers from the same tired cliches and slow movement like so many rom-coms before it, but the development along the way somewhat makes up for that. Sakurasou executes a love triangle better than most, but it's still not perfect. The chemistry between both Sorata and Mashiro, and Sorata and Nanami is extremely well done. Nothing felt forced. As usual, I found myself cheering for the losing side. Seriously, I always pick the loser in these things. Unlike most of those other love triangles, however, I didn't have an issue with the alternative. So Mashiro or Nanami, I didn't really care. I was happy with whichever way it turned out. A testament to just how well Sakurasou developed these characters and handled their interactions. All of the main characters see extensive growth in screen time, ultimately making me very attached to each one and very sad when the show came to an end. The character interactions are some of the more organic I've seen and are easily the highlight of the series. On the surface, the characters all seem to fit a different cliched archetype. Most of the characters stick to these archetypes for the duration of the show. However, that doesn't mean they can't see growth or have a meaningful story arc. In fact, we get to see a much deeper side to every single one of them, minus the teacher and sister. Ultimately, it's not the character cliches that define Sakurasou, but rather their interactions and development. I really felt connected to them, and by the time the show wrapped up, I didn't want to see it come to an end. Animation-wise, there's really not much to say other than bravo. J.C.Staff has done a lot, and I mean a lot, of mediocre to shitty crap, but they really hit this one out of the park. I absolutely loved the color palette. The generally vibrant color scheme fits the world well, and I loved how the colors often changed to reflect the mood. It was a small touch that really went a long way in making the more dramatic moments as emotional and impactful as they were. Another nice touch was how awesome Mashiro's artwork looked. They clearly put some effort into designing it, and the final product is great. The soundtrack is pretty standard. You've got a few tracks that really stick out and a bunch that are easily forgettable. The background music during some of the more emotional scenes was particularly memorable, even if I wouldn't listen to it on its own. I'm not going to gush over the soundtrack like I did over the animation, but I don't have anything bad to say either. The show has 2 openings and 2 endings. I like them all, but the first ending, Days of Dash, is one of my absolute favorites. Call me a sucker for Konami Suzuki, but in particular, I love the way they played the intro in the background at the end of some of the episodes, before cutting to the actual sequence. Another nice touch that went a long way. In terms of production values, I have mostly positive things to say. Is the animation some of the best I've ever seen? No. Is the soundtrack something I'm going to listen to on its own? For the most part, no. Still, both are exceptional overall and do all of the little things right to make them really stand out. So after that opening tirade about the trouble with expectations, you're probably wondering whether or not Sakurasou lived up to mine. I came in looking for a rom-com and I got one. What I wasn't expecting was an emotional rollercoaster ride with a very true-to-life message about failure. You know the old cliche, if at first you don't succeed, try and try again? Well, Sakurasou seems to say that sometimes, no matter how much or how hard you try, things just don't go the way you want them to. Is it frustrating? Hell yes, but it's all about perseverance. Failure doesn't define who you are. It's how you get back up. If you're looking for great romance, solid comedy, relatable characters, and a realistic outlook on life, you've come to the right place. Don't go into Sakurasou expecting anything particularly groundbreaking, but don't go into it looking for a generic cookie-cutter rom-com either. So with that, I award Sakurasou with an approval rating of watch, and a definite recommendation to do so. As for the overall score, I struggled mightily with this one. I'll give it an 8, or 4 Plan Cs out of 5. It's not the best rom-com I've seen, and certainly not the best drama I've seen. Nevertheless, it's still one of my favorites, and somewhat of a guilty pleasure, I'll admit. If you're looking for something similar to Sakurasou, I point you towards the obvious Toradora. I don't love it as much as some, but it's still one of the best this genre has to offer. Also take a look at Bokura wa Mina Kawaiiso, or the Kawaii Complex Guide to Manners and Hostile Behavior, for another rom-com with a very similar setting and setup. And that's all for me. For an explanation of the rating system, look in the description. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and feel free to follow me on Twitter. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.